My name's Brandon Freedy. I'm from Missoula, Montana, and I reject state violence. When I was younger, I was a fiscal conservative. I didn't go into the whole religious conservative thing from where I stood, since there was really no way to objectively prove which religion was right and which religion was wrong. I didn't think the government had any business regulating on religious matters of any kind. But I didn't think that the government should be trying to take too much money from people in order to have all these welfare state programs. I figured that the more self-reliant people were, that the better off they'd be. They'd become healthier, well-adjusted individuals. They wouldn't feel dependent on other people. They'd just be more psychologically healthy. They'd feel better about themselves. And when I was in high school, we had to take our mandatory high school civics class, and that was really about the first time I'd ever heard of third parties, people who are independent voters even. All I'd ever heard about were Democrats and Republicans and conservatives and liberals. Let me think. So, while I was taking that civics class, we had to do a research project, and instead of deciding to research the Democrats or the Republicans, I decided to research something that I hadn't heard of, and so I ended up researching the Libertarians. And I found that fit much more closely with the way I interpreted the world. That people should, do as much as they can for themselves, and that the government should really try and stay out of things as much as possible. Lower taxes, more freedom, leave people alone, none of this drug war stuff, no prohibition on things like alcohol and other stuff like that. And I consider myself a small L libertarian. I was never a party member, and I considered myself that from probably the time I was 18 until I was 21. Just before I turned 21, I attended a seminar put on by the Institute for Humane Studies in Bryn Mawr, Pennsylvania. And there was really the first time I was exposed to people who term themselves anarcho-capitalists or market anarchists. And I found the arguments really fascinating. I was pretty diehard for a minarchist at the time, but I mean, compared to these people, I was rather conventional. And I found myself listening to their arguments, and the ethical argument they made I found really convincing, even though I didn't accept it right away. And so the cognitive dissonance sort of kicked in, and I find myself sitting there wondering, there are these government programs and they exist for the greater good, but they're funded by taxation, which is certainly not a voluntary activity. And so how could I justify the fact that there were people in prison who were there locked up with murderers and rapists and violent people like that simply because they hadn't paid their taxes? I didn't know the situation of everybody who didn't pay their taxes. Maybe they had medical bills and they were in debt. Maybe they were just poor, or maybe they were just a jerk and didn't feel like paying them. I didn't know the specifics of every case, but what I did know is that it was a crime to not pay your taxes and that you'd go to jail for it. And I found myself asking myself, that's a great way to phrase it. I found myself sitting there thinking about, could I really justify locking someone up just because I wanted there to be roads, just because I wanted there to be a police force and a fire department? Was it really worth threatening people with imprisonment and possibly shooting them if they didn't comply? And after sitting there and thinking about it, I concluded the answer was no.